Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. Hello, Thos.
Hello, Nick.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. I think today we're going to be talking about a tale as old as time.
A tale as old as time, yes. And the singer and actress and entertainer most famous for putting those beautiful words to celluloid, I guess you could say. In
singing
her
them, perhaps,
starring role as a teapot, which is something she would often think she'd play. We are, of course, talking about Dame Angela Lansbury, as I always delight in saying when Thos turns up.
I naturally think it's Lansbury, but of course it isn't. It is Lansbury. You're absolutely right. It's just I'm terribly affected.
And sadly, she's no longer with us. She's, whatever. Heaven's sounding like a great place now because so many people are leaving, aren't they? And Angela is one of those people sadly no longer with us.
Yes, I mean, basically we want to pay tribute to Angela Lansbury because not only is she a great name in the world of theatre and television and film, a part of her career, but only a part of her career, was that she appeared in musical films and she appeared in musical theatre. And actually, you think, really, Angela Lansbury, I know she did a bit of that and she did a bit of this and she was in this. And then suddenly you realise, oh no, she was in lots and lots and lots of things. The Harvey Girls, she was in, she's Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd, the original American version of that. As we've just mentioned, she's the teapot lady. She's forgotten the name of the character.
Mrs. Potts.
Mrs. Potts, well, that would make sense. And I remember her son Chip. From Beauty and the Beast, when the film came out from Disney. She was in Mame. She launched Mame. She was in Anyone Can Whistle, which is a really important Stephen Sondheim, even though it was an enormous failure. She revisited it for galas later on in her career. She was, towards the end of her career, she was playing Desiree's mother in A Little Night Music, once again Sondheim. And then, of course, Bedknobs and Broomsticks. So she was doing children's films, and these are all musicals. And suddenly you realise that's a lot. That's only scratching the surface. And that's on top of all the other things she was doing, which were not musical, like Noel Coward and goodness knows what. Really versatile actress over an enormously long career.
That typewriter for 20 years.
Yes, I mean, the number of people she murdered and framed other people for doing.
Yes,
but. Isn't it interesting that actually, for example, Murder, She Wrote, which of course is a Miss Marple ripoff, is still fabulous in its own right. And it finished years ago, and yet she is still associated with it.
She was Miss Marple as well, wasn't she?
She was in the Mirror Crack film of that. I mean, not musicals these, but I should just say there is a musical connection between Murder, She Wrote and the world of musicals. And funnily enough, it's not Angela Lansbury. As far as I can gather, towards the end of the series of Murder, She Wrote, she wasn't in every episode. She sort of negotiated herself out a few of the episodes to give her a rest. And there was a kind of recurring character who was a fruity British actor. That was the character. I don't know the name of the character, but the actor who was playing him was Keith Michelle. And Keith Michelle was actually, I believe, an Australian performer who'd spent all his time living in Britain for the most part, occasionally appearing in America. And he appeared in lots and lots of British musicals, including a musicalised version of The Barretts of Wimpole Street by Ron Grainer in the 1960s. Ron Grainer was the writer of the Doctor Who theme tune, in case you're wondering why I've mentioned that. But also...
He'll bring it back to GNS in a minute, listeners, if you're not careful.
Well, Keith Michelle appeared in a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan. Right. Indeed, in the 1989 Taylor Walker TV series of most of the Gilbert and Sullivans, he was in 2 or 3 of those. And, of course, as I've mentioned Gilbert and Sullivan, let's push open the door and head on to Ruddigore, where he played Robin, who was later on to be...
Someone owes me £5 bob, I'm not sure who.
But, so he... It's interesting that Angela Lansbury, who had this enormous acting career, of which musical, film and theatre was part of it, when she wasn't playing Jessica Fletcher, and this other chap came in and played the other substitute detective, if you like, he also had exactly the same kind of career, Keith Michelle, as he was a great actor. I mean, he's most famous for playing the straight role of Henry VIII in The Six Wives of Henry VIII in the 1970s BBC television, high prestige drama series. So you've got a very particular kind of career in which being in musicals is merely a part of it. And Angela Lansbury, for me, is a great musicals performer. But for most people, I think they would say, oh, Angela Lansbury is Jessica Fletcher. And I knew that she did a few other things as well, possibly including musicals.
Well, she's Dear World.
Which is another Jerry Herman.
Yeah. And The King and I. She was in that as well.
Which of the two was she?
She was I.
She donned a bald wig and became.
How radical! But famously, she was in Gypsy in 1973, and
in London. Yes, she played it in London.
And she would say, I'm going off Wikipedia. She received Tony Awards for her starring roles as Countess Aurelia in Dear World, Anne Rose in Gypsy in 1973. So she must have done it on Broadway. If you see Gypsy after Rose's turn, she carries on bowing once the audience have stopped. And that was something that Angela Lansbury put in to the production. And it's something that everyone now does, which is an interesting tidbit for you.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I think that goes rather to the point of what we were talking about, that she's an actress first, for whom musical theatre is a part of her career.
A bit like Imelda Staunton, isn't it?
But exactly. Funny enough, I want to talk about the kind of type that you might say that Angela Lansbury fell into. Because I don't think she's easy to label. She often does the kind of roles that were either originally would have been sung by Ethel Merman or later on with the Ethel Merman size kind of roles in theatre. But I don't think you'd ever say that Angela Lansbury was in any way like Ethel Merman. What she was, of course, was a commanding presence on stage and a brilliant actress, who was the lead actress. She's star material, she's a lead. Bedknobs and Broomsticks is about her performance over everyone else's. And in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, she is up against some pretty stiff competition. David Tomlinson, who's already been tried and tested in Mary Poppins.
Hippos, and elephants,
and
a bed.
Undersea Kingdoms, yes, quite. That show is about her. And she is, interestingly, it's a really interesting character because you like Angela Lansbury from the beginning, but she's the anti-Mary Poppins. I mean, this show is, if you like, the other bookend to Mary Poppins. There's certainly the film version. It's even got sequences that would have been in Mary Poppins, as we know.
And songs.
Indeed. I mean, written for it, and then no room in Mary Poppins, so into Bedknobs and Broomsticks it goes, and excellently so. But in Mary Poppins, you've got a dysfunctional family in some way, and then Mary Poppins comes in and teaches the father, David Tomlinson, to have empathy and builds a relationship. The subversion of that is Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Because while she's very clearly on the side of good, Eglantine, our heroine, if you like, she's not very good with people. She doesn't want the children billeted on her as evacuees during the war. And then she meets David Tomlinson, who always comes along. In this case, David Tomlinson, if you like, is the humane but he's a failure in real terms. He's a street performer, not a successful one. He's a con man because he's been doing this correspondence magic course by post, which of course is all a big con, but by accident works. But he's a larger-than-life, humane character, and you see that. He takes the lead in Portobello Road, that sequence. He gets people excited when they're looking for the other half of the Book of Astaroth, or whatever it's called. And it is through the shenanigans of the film and story that Eglantine becomes a mother figure, if you like, which she absolutely isn't all the way through, even though she's trying to do the right thing. She wants to learn magic so she can help rebuff, to help the war effort and rebuff the Nazis. That's a pretty good ambition. But what she's not good at is human relationships. And by the end, she's formed an improvised family, and it is an improvised family. She's got there's a kind of husband figure in the David Tomlinson character. They've got the three children who have been billeted on, and she has learned to not be a mother, but to be a mother-like figure, certainly to be the maternal figure in that improvised family. And that's quite a difficult ask, I think, of any actor or actress, to start from. You've got to be likeably I'll say that again. You've got to be likeable, but without empathy. And that's quite a difficult ask. And then you've got to show and develop that empathy to get to the end. Now, that isn't a role that you'd have given to Ethel Merman. I mean, I wouldn't cast Ethel Merman in Bed, Knobs and Broomsticks, and thank the Lord they didn't. But she was too busy preparing for her disco album, I should imagine, a few years on. But
highlight of her career.
Certainly in her career. Let's put it that way. But, you wouldn't put Ethel Merman in that role. So I think that goes to show that Ethel Merman and Angela Lansbury are not interchangeable characters. It's the same with Gypsy. She can do the roles that Ethel Merman can do, but Ethel Merman cannot do the roles that Angela Lansbury does. And that's because Angela Lansbury is a much better actress and has a much greater range.
I think she's very good for me, obviously, a child of the 1990s.
Not the 1890s.
No, that's you, Thos. It'll always be, obviously, growing up seeing her on Murder, She Wrote, and then hearing her be Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast. And then I came to her through Sweeney Todd. And didn't know much about Mame or anything like that. But so for me, she was always that kind of whatever the opposite of avuncular is, if there's a female version.
Avuncular is about uncles, isn't it? So,
yes.
Yeah, I don't know.
Auntuncular? Is that a... Auntula?
Yeah, she's aunt-like.
Yes. She's always a kind of very warm character. And for me, Mrs. Potts was the perfect... that is... who that song is for.
But it's it's a totally different character to Eglantine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Totally.
But I didn't grow up watching Bed, Knobs and Broomsticks.
Well, we put other things on occasionally.
Yeah. But there's a story that when Howard Ashman and Alan Menken wrote Beauty and the Beast, Alan, originally the composer, sung the song in a very pop style.
Oh, yes.
They sent it to Angela Lansbury, and she said, I can't do this. This is way out of my league. So Howard Ashman, the actor of the two,
yes,
played the part of Mrs. Potts and spoke it in that kind of lyrical way. And Angela went, that's how you want it
now
done.
I get it. Yes, quite.
So that shows her acting chops over her singing chops.
Yes, I think that's a good observation. I really do. What do you make of her as Mrs. Lovett? Because I take it you've seen the video of the original version.
She is Mrs. Lovett.
She is. I mean, I think she's the archetype, Mrs. Lovett, isn't she? And there are going to be people. You either make a decision if you're playing Mrs. Lovett in later versions. You either do it like Angela Lansbury, or you do it so totally different.
It's a bit like Ellen Green in Little Shop of Horrors. It's
so many versions.
She's Audrey too.
Yeah.
I always wondered whether she was English or not, because she was Irish originally, grew up in Ireland, and then moved to America. So,
are you entirely sure about that? Because her father was the Speaker of the House of Commons. But I understood that she certainly lived in Britain, and indeed you can hear it when she, for example, in one of the earliest films she's in, and I can't remember which one it is, but it's a film from the 40s, 1949 I think it is. She sings in a very Cockney kind of a way, How'd you like to spoon with me?
But her accent was always all over the place for me. And even so, when she did Murder, She Wrote, she had this weird kind of twin sister or someone that lived in England. So they would do episodes in England where she played the British version.
The more British version. Oh,
and she played the more kind of Americanized version in the New England.
Well, can I flip that, you see? Because I know Angela Lansbury from her performance in Bed, Knobs and Broomsticks. That's my principal growing up experience of Angela Lansbury. So that when I saw Fantasia 2000, and she introduced one of the segments on that, she'd obviously been living in America for a very long time and had that thoroughly twangy transatlantic accent, which is neither fish nor fowl, and not quite British and not quite American. But by that stage, I think she was on the spectrum of being much more American in the way she spoke. And I remember it being a considerable culture shock to hear Angela Lansbury, who I think of still as a British actress, even though I know that she's performed so often in America.
You spat your tea out, didn't you, Thos?
I don't know why I took it into the cinema. Yes, I called the waiter for a napkin, and a long time I waited. But
still waiting to this day.
But curiously, I also saw her in 2009 when she triumphantly returned to the West End here in London in An Old Coward. In Blithe Spirit, not a musical role, of course. She plays Madame Arcati, and she was fabulous as Madame Arcati. And it's the only time I've actually felt very happy joining in a a standing ovation. Normally, I'm a bit standoffish, ironically, about standing ovations because they're given so freely and quite often to rubbish. They're almost a matter of course now, which robs them of any importance. But when we stood for Angela
You show your appreciation by staying in your seat, don't you, Phil?
I show my appreciation by sending a firmly worded telegram to the author sometime later. But seriously, I was delighted to stand for Angela Lansbury. And it was still a knockout performance. And
You make it sound like a political party.
Well, her grandfather, as we've established, represented one. But she was. It's a gift of a role, anyway. And Madame Arcati.
But was that because it was Angela Lansbury?
It's two things. It was a sterling performance as Madame Arcati, but it was also because it was Dame Angela Lansbury, and we wanted to show our appreciation of her having always been brilliant, and that's the thing, I think. And this is ultimately where this tribute goes. But she could turn her hand to everything. And even when a show was a failure, and let's take us back to Anyone Can Whistle, that show famously lasted, I think, 9 performances on its original run. I mean, it's been continually revived because it's an early Sondheim, and a very curious beast it is too. I mean, it's a very unsatisfactory play, let's be brutal. Arthur Lawrence is not at his best when writing this, and I've heard people describe it as everything from an absurdist comedy to being a parable about fascism. And all of those things are true, and all those things are not true, and many other places in between. We keep going back to it because it's a seminal Sondheim and important, even if it wasn't a success. And she also returned to it because there were various gala performances over the years where she played the narrator rather than Cara Hoover, the corrupt local mayor who sets the wheels in motion on the miracle that brings in all the sightseers and tourists. So I think, and once again, that's a role that you couldn't put Ethel Merman in. You know, you could ask Angela Lansbury to have a crack at Reno Sweeney in Anything Goes, which of course was originally an Ethel Merman role. You could not ask Ethel Merman to have a go at
Mrs. Potts.
Well, certainly not not motherly. But yeah, but you're right. You know, that's good. And we were just saying how different the motherly Mrs. Potts is to the non-motherly Eglantine.
Yeah.
So I can't praise Angela Lansbury enough, and it's a great sadness that she's passed, of course. But what a treat that there's such a history of her work. Obviously, the films live on forever. The stage versions don't, but in many cases there's recordings of them and things like that.
And the last thing I saw her in was the sequel to Mary Poppins.
Of course.
She had a lovely cameo in that at the end, singing their version of Let's Go Fly a Kite, which is The Only Way Is Up or something like that. I can't seem to remember, but it was very,
that may have been done, The Only Way Is Up.
It was very, very touching. Playing the balloon lady, just kind of full circle for her career in a way, you could say.
And then she popped.
Yes, now she's up in heaven. Yes. So it's so much more about Angela Lansbury. I'm sure we haven't touched, but if you could take away one role, Thos, of Angela Lansbury's,
well, for me, I think it's going to be pretty obvious. I still think I saw the stage version of Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and so did you. And I thought it was terribly good, and we've discussed it before. And I thought the woman who played Eglantine in that, which was a slightly rewritten role, is not the same Eglantine as it is in the film. There's a slightly different profile, there's a slightly different journey. Much of it's the same, but not completely. And of course, it's doing slightly different things, which are a bit more tricksy and theatrical. But she owned the stage in the stage version. So anything I say here is no way denigrating that performance, which I thought was amazing and a standout performance. Actually,
Diane Pilkington playing that part.
If that show comes back, I jolly well hope that she is in that role again. But the film version is still for me the master version, from which all others will be struck. You know, it's the master copy, and I think that her Eglantine is a performance of a career, actually. I'm going to say that. I think so. And I tell you what, I think she was terribly well served by the score. You know, Sherman Brothers, you know, we need to talk about them briefly because they're always good. In a way, it's so easy to say they wrote songs for children's films, which isn't quite right. But, you know, that's often... you can dismiss them that way if you want.
They wrote musicals.
Yeah, exactly. And they wrote more than Disney films. And a lot, you know, yes, they I think we said before, you know, in one of their musicals called Over Here, which was a British musical about the Second World War, it was the Andrews Sisters and John Travolta. You know, that's not Disney. A very young John Travolta and a very old set of Andrews Sisters. But that's not the point. Actually, there are good songs in that. The Sherman Brothers are a very dependable writing partnership. And actually, you dismiss them at your peril because their songs are tricksy and clever and easy on the ear, but actually much more complicated than you think and sophisticated, even though they all sound like musical numbers or marches.
Or nursery rhymes.
The sophistication behind that is that they allow, like Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin's songs all sound simple, and it's easy to say, all too simple. But actually, what's happening is these songs are mint. They're solid gold, carat minted songs. Irving Berlin.
I love minted carrots.
Yes, as it happens, so do I. But Irving Berlin, deceptively simple. The Sherman Brothers, deceptively simple. Angela Lansbury, also deceptively simple in how she makes her roles really come to life. The songs that she sings, and this is the point I'm going with this one. You asked me what I thought was my favourite role for her. I would have to say that my favourite song is one of the songs that was cut, of course. It's been reinstated subsequently, but that's A Step in the Right Direction. And that is a song that comes to me unbidden throughout my adult life. I might be heading off to clean my teeth of an evening, and A Step in the Right Direction will land in my head. I might be strolling into the local supermarket thinking, what I really need now are some carrots. And minted carrots, I'll be thinking. But I'll be taking a step in the right direction with me through the door.
And of course, I mentioned this in the episode we did with talking about Bedknobs and Broomsticks. As someone who will be in Disney World in 2 or 3 weeks' time, it is very much...
As an exhibit.
Yes, it is part... That song is also used the same tune for a thing called the Carousel of Progress.
You did say that, that's right, yes. Yeah. But it's a Sherman Brothers song,
It's a Sherman Brothers,
yeah.
And there's so many Sherman Brothers songs in the parks, and the Tiki 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 Room and all that kind of stuff, because, again, it's musical theatre done on a bigger scale, blah, blah, blah. Not going into that lecture again. What my next question to you, Thos, is what role would you love to have seen her do on the stage?
Oh, now that's interesting, because there's too many to pick from. Now, the obvious one to go for would be Mrs. Lovett, but I won't go for Mrs. Lovett because regular listeners of Musical Talk will know that I have a slight problem with Mrs. Lovett as a character, not the performance. But I think she's too much of a grotesque, particularly in Act 2. And I particularly detest By the Sea in Act 2 of Sweeney Todd, because it looks like an obvious comedy song before we go into the helter-skelter of let's put everyone in the furnace, or worse.
Cut that one, I think.
Yes. Which was a proper burn, of course. I don't know
Mame?
enough. Well, this is the point, you see. Now, I've listened to the score of Mame and I've listened to the score of Dear World, but I can't say
Mrs. Santa Claus?
Well, I do. You see, there's something in Mrs. Santa Claus which is actually quite good. There are several songs in that. Jerry Herman is, once again, not to be sniffed at. So if I could have seen it, I might have liked to have seen Dear World or Mame with the original cast, because actually watching B. Arthur and Angela Lansbury, who became great friends, on the stage together, and they have a lovely bitchy duet in Mame, would be cracking. So I'd be seeing the musical and seeing Angela Lansbury. But then again, there's a part of me says, well, wouldn't you like to have been there on the opening night of Anyone Can Whistle and seen her in that?
Or closing night.
It was only a week and a half away. It's almost as quick as the turnover of British Prime Ministers. So, but seriously, you think, well, watching Angela Lansbury in a seminal Sondheim, that's better than Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd, which is a success. So what would I pick?
While you think about it, I'll say for me...
I was going to say the same question to number 2.
Seminal, iconic performance, not Bedknobs and Broomsticks, it's not Sweeney Todd, it's not Mame, it's her exercise video. And it's well worth a watch if you have an hour and you want to see Angela Lansbury writhing around on the grass. You watch this video.
How old was she when she made this?
I think it was in the late either 80s or 90s, and I don't mean that's how old she was. It was that was when she...
It's a bit post-Jane Fonda, isn't it?
It's a time when everyone was doing workout videos, and I
can assure you I was
not. It's got
not.
some cracking moments in it, I'll say that.
Is there sufficient lycra?
There's bath moments.
Good Lord.
Yes, it's well worth a watch if you...
But there are no songs?
No, sadly. Though it could be done as a musical, I think would be quite fun. But anyway, that's a bit of a side note for...
A bit of a side note, yes, fine. Well, talk about finding the unseen parts of the career. I am stunned by that. No, let us roll back to... I think I would have to just say, if I could go anywhere, I would watch Angela Lansbury on the opening night of Anyone Can Whistle. But that would be an exercise. I would still then go off and watch go to the cinema to see Bedknobs and Broomsticks when it came out in 1972 or whatever it was. And what I'd really like to have seen, I'm actually going to cheat on this. I now know what I would like to have seen. The original.
No, you can't go back. Sorry.
The original uncut version of Bedknobs and Broomsticks when it came out and was shown in its original showings in America before they cut about an hour's worth of material out. Because, as you probably know, although they've reinserted a great deal, there's some bits they still don't have. They've got some recordings. I think A Step in the Right Direction is a song they no longer have the film of. They've got the recording, but they don't have the film. They've got photographs of it. I would love to see Bedknobs and Broomsticks as it was supposed to have been, as it should have been, and as it should now be, but cannot be. And for me, I think that would be the premiere of choice.
Well, thank you for asking mine. I'm just
going to limber up these thighs with a quick Angela Lansbury workout while you tell me the finale of this episode. I'm
going to be a basic bitch and just say
no, you're a very
Sweeney Todd, I think, because it's a I love the show and I like the score, and to see her in it, it is her role. That would be my answer. But I think it's sorely missed, but what a career.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if I may say, she also, I think, is the answer to what used to be the age-old question of musical theatre. Quite wrongly, I think, when people used to oppose or try to oppose Sondheim versus Jerry Herman. The argument used to be, would you like the musical Jerry Herman or the sophisticated Stephen Sondheim, as though you can't love or enjoy both. Well, bearing in mind that Angela Lansbury played the lead role in a whole bunch of Jerry Herman musicals, which were essentially written for her, and a whole bunch of Stephen Sondheim musicals, which were also written for her.
And a teapot.
And a teapot for Disney, why not? But seriously, at the end of the day, she did both and showed that you could do both and be good in both. So actually, what it also has shown is that the world of musical theatre is cohesive and not divisive.
Angela Lansbury, Thos, thank you for...
1925 to 1922.
What she was 1925 to 1922. She went backwards in time. That's
did
right.
I say that?
You did.
Damn it! I thought I was being so clever.
I think you mean
1925 to 2022.
I think you mean 16th of October 1925 to the 11th of October 2022, aged 96.
She was just shy of her 97th birthday.
Yeah, just like another legend that we've lost recently, but that's probably for another episode altogether. And I don't mean Sondheim.
I don't think Best of Queen, as it were, would be...
What Queen, the Queen, musicals have there been?
You see, in the early part of her reign, it would have been very difficult to represent the Queen, or indeed any figure on stage, because that wasn't done. And these days, it's prime ministers and senior politicians you sometimes see. Harold Wilson turns up in...
Made in Dagenham.
Made in Dagenham, thank you very much indeed. He's in that... Margaret Thatcher's referenced in
Billy Elliot.
I mean, Billy Elliot opens with
Arthur Scargill, doesn't it?
No, it opens up with Herbert Morrison, who was a 1940s.
I tried.
A 1940s politician, was responsible for the nationalisation of the mines. That's fairly obscure knowledge, to be honest. You see politicians, but actually,
Queen Victoria's in Mary Poppins for a brief second.
In the second one?
No, in the first one, in the stage show.
Oh, in the stage show. Oh, well, right. In which case, I've seen a version of HMS Pinafore where Queen Victoria turns up at the end. It's not in the original, you understand, but also, Queen Victoria is in a musical. There's a musical called Iron Albert by Charles Strauss. Here's a trivia fact. Charles Strauss reused one of his songs.
My Prince Albert will come out tomorrow.
I jolly well hope not.
So they sung
Mel
right
Brooks, as you know, no slouch in the musical theatre department himself, had a TV series about, I think it was Robin Hood in the early 70s on American television. It wasn't a great success, but the theme tune was by Charles Strauss, and it was called When Things Were Rotten. And the series didn't do terribly well, so the song was repurposed, and I think this is the way around, it might be the other way around, as a song in...
Iron Albert.
In Iron Albert, absolutely. But that is a musical about Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert. but I can't think of a musical.
I look forward to the musical of The Crown, which I'm sure will be inevitable. A very long musical that would be.
No, I don't think so. Oh, well, of course, I suppose we should say, yes, I can now think of a musical where the Queen... Oh, goodness. It was... Now, I don't know if it's the same Diana musical that made a bit of a splash in the news headlines, at least in this country, as being a bit bad, that was actually staged a few years ago.
Do you mean the wonderful Diana the musical that was on Netflix?
Oh, was that the one I'm talking about?
And on Broadway.
But there was a Diana musical. Now, what I don't know is if it's the same Diana musical that I was listening to the score of about 10 years ago, where it has a terrible scene where the Queen and where Prince Philip was trying to flirt with the Queen of an evening. Yeah, and he's like, no, it's the Queen is trying to flirt with Prince Philip. She says, "Oh, Philly, come here," and it was in terrible.
Oh, probably.
Taste. Yeah.
There's also a German opera of Diana as well.
Is there now?
Or German music.
Well, that sounds like a tragedy in its own
Diana
right.
Das musical, I think.
Yes.
But
so yes, the Queen would have turned up in these things as sort of an incidental role in somebody else's musical, but I mean, I would consider it terribly tasteless to make a musical of the Queen. Or at least...
One will rock one, the Queen musical.
Well, quite. But then again, it's all about time, isn't it? Because Elizabeth I is the central character in Gloriana, which is a Benjamin Britten opera written to mark the Queen's coronation in 1952. So that's slightly more interesting. It's not a musical, it's a piece of opera, but in terms of being musical theatre in the broadest sense, that is what opera is. A piece of musical theatre opera written specifically to mark the opening of the reign of Elizabeth II in, the coronation's 53 rather than 52 when she came to the throne. But yes, right from the beginning of the reign.
And all the way up to 6, of course.
Hasn't got Elizabeth I in it, though.
No.
That's just a generation before. It's got Elizabeth I's mother in it.
Yes, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But anything else that springs to mind to discuss?
In terms of royal musicals?
In terms of anything.
Well, I can think of one royal musical which isn't about a real royal family, but is an avatar of the British royal family of the 1930s, and we covered it here in Musical Talk for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012, which is...
Cole Porter's Jubilee.
It's Cole Porter's Jubilee, which introduced...
See, I listen.
Yeah, which introduced Begin the Begin, amongst other songs, So... and has one of my favourite Cole Porter songs.
Begin to be Queen.
Very good. And has one of my favourite Cole Porter songs, which is called Why Shouldn't I? Anyway, there we are. So in terms of royalty and real monarchs being represented in forms of musical theatre, plenty of it. But actual representations of Her late Majesty the Queen, not many. And I would say, please, let's not have any for 100 years, and then it's fine.
Go to Netflix and watch Diana the musical. I'd be very, very interested to hear your thoughts.
I'm sure you would. How much money are you offering me here? I'd also like to say at this stage, I'll
lend you my Netflix account.
I don't say that, because I don't have a Netflix account, and I'm perfectly happy on that basis. But I probably would be prepared to watch Diana the musical at some stage and express a view.
So it'll be Hamilton and Diana the musical, and we'll see how long Frost lasts.
Can I just say I wouldn't class those at all the same. The reason I haven't seen Hamilton is because I'm not vastly interested. It's not because I don't have any sense that it's an excellent musical. Of course it's an excellent musical. I'm sorry to say that I've not seen Diana, so I shouldn't express a view, but I've heard nothing in any of the reviews that leads me to suspect that it's anything other than a little bit less than absolutely pristine.
Diana the musical was... It was a candle blowing in the wind, but it went out
very
quickly. Thank you so much, Sos, for joining me for this week's episode.
Pleasure.
We'll see you soon, discussing Dame Angela Lansbury and other royal members of the theatre.
And we end with God Save the King. I hope everyone's standing.
Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk, you can visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk, where you'll find all our episodes, or you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Musical Talk.